Welcome once again. Zimbabwe joined the rest of the world in commemorating the annual World Day Against the Death Penalty on the 10th of October. At least 80 Zimbabweans are currently facing the hangman's noose amid calls by civic society organizations to abolish the death penalty as it breaches the right to life free from torture and degrading treatment.
The Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum has urged the Zimbabwean government to adhere to international human rights best practices and take proactive steps towards striking the law off the statute books and abolishing the death penalty. Joining us this morning from Zimbabwe is Isheanesu Chirisa, Public Interest Manager, NGO Forum. Good morning, Chirisa, and thank you for joining us. Chirisa, are you able to hear us? Okay, seems that we are, of course, going to be trying to connect with Chirisa whilst we have conversation about the World Day Against the Death Penalty. All right, Chirisa, are you able to hear us now? All right.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us. Zimbabwe last had an execution in 2005. Are there chances that the 80 inmates on death row will be executed, or are there chances that they might be exempted in some form?
All right. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on this conversation. This is a very important conversation, especially when we're looking towards preservation and promotion of the right to life. Indeed, in Zimbabwe, we have had a moratorium on execution of inmates sentenced to death by the hangman. I think this has been like this since 2005. Getting back to your question, I think it's a question that I may not immediately come up with a yes or a no. But what I may say, which is of importance, is the necessary environment to abolish death penalty has been created. The necessary advocacy work initiatives and the necessary political conscientization has been put in place. Why do I say so? Our current president, His Excellency Emmerson Mnangagwa, has been a victim of a death sentence at some time. So he has been on record to publicly condemn the death penalty. And you realize that sometime in 2020, he wrote a foreword to a project which was spearheaded by local NGOs gathering mass opinion on death penalty in Zimbabwe. He wrote a foreword which clearly put his position clearly about death penalty. He has been on record several times, even on social media platforms, condemning death penalty. So in as much as we have not seen any traction in as far as creating the necessary legal framework to abolish death penalty in Zimbabwe, we believe the necessary advocacy initiatives are in place. They haven't been put in place. Probably we are at a time where we need one last more push to have the necessary political will to have a law that clearly abolish death penalty. So I wouldn't really say that at the moment we are about to deal with this issue. But what I understand, and maybe what we have noted constantly, especially through the leadership of the current president, the necessary conscientization has been done. So it's just about taking the last leap, which is to legislate against death penalty.
Well, of course, to put it in context, across the continent, from the 54 member states of the UN, 24 currently have abolished the death penalty. 13 still carry out the death penalty and still hold it, and about 16 countries, only use it for crimes, but haven't, carried out any capital punishment, in about 10 years and below and above. And of course, Zimbabwe falls into that category. But I want you to share more, on the reasons for calling for the abolishment. There's people who argue that people who commit certain crimes like murder have forfeited their right to life. So what would your response be to those people?
Okay. So maybe when we're looking at criminal justice system and its theories, we're looking at punishment of offenders of various crimes. So now progressive Democrats are moving towards theories that promote detention, at the same time corrective behaviors and methodologies, rather methodologies or approaches that promotes corrective approaches. So maybe when we're looking at death penalty, the question is, what is it that we're trying to achieve out of that? Admittedly, a wrong would have been done. Can we say it's good enough to correct a wrong with another wrong? Is it good enough maybe for a country to take away a life simply because somebody has taken life? Never mind the circumstances, like in Zimbabwe, death penalty is given where murder has been committed in what's called aggravating circumstances. So never mind the circumstances under which death has occurred or murder has occurred. Is it adequate? Are we serving any purpose when we then give capital sentencing? So what I would say now is there is no direct relationship with correcting behavior, with deterring deterrence, which is one of the core fundamentals of criminal justice system. When you punish within the criminal justice framework, you seek to correct wrong and errant behaviors. But now, when you sentence somebody to die by the hangman, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And when we're talking of right to life, why then should we give exceptions? Is it any good that death that we are trying to condemn, it's being done by the state? Yes, admittedly, there are exceptions within which the fundamental human rights freedoms may be limited within the scope of the law, but is this a justifiable limitation? So I would say that why we should insist on the abolishment of death penalty, it's not perhaps serving what we intend it to be serving. Has there been enough evidence to show that whenever a murder has occurred, we have to correct it through death penalty? I would say no, because if so, throughout the world, we would have seen reduction of the number or instances of murder that occur. So in giving completion to the right to life, I would propose that it's quite urgent and imperative to do away with murder, capital punishment of death penalty. And from the mass opinion survey that has been done in Zimbabwe, generally in Zimbabwe, there are cultural religious beliefs that do not support correction of a wrong behavior through an eye for an eye kind of situation. So in as much as murder, especially committed under aggravated circumstances, should never be trivialized, I think death penalty, it's not justifiable under any circumstances. So it still remains that death penalty has to be abolished, and we get probably other commensurate sentences other than death penalty.
Well, we'll see how Zimbabwe and the rest of the world takes this, rest of the continent, I mean, especially as regards the advocacy against death penalty. Thank you very much, Chirisa, for your time with us this morning. Do enjoy the rest of your day.